right, we're diving in. How to make good choices are a major factor in how to not suck at art. And by making good choices, I'm talking about, taking what you see and deciding on which way you're going to handle it. It's kind of like life in general, actually. Life, if you stop and think about it, is all about perception and the decisions you make off of that perception. So if that's the case for life, it also works in art. It works in drawing, it works in sketching, it works in inking and painting and design work, computer, traditional, all of it. It's all about making good choices in terms of what colors you select, what medium you choose to draw in or paint in, what tools, all of that. It's all relative, but it all is a matter of choice. And, you can almost start at the very beginning, and not the beginning of man, but the beginning of essentially what you choose to feed your brain. So in the very beginning, you have sort of influences, and there are things that sort of affect how you want to draw or paint or whatever. So if that's the case, be mindful of what you bring in, what you feed your creativity with. For example, say you're into anime and you love that sort of the Japanese style of animation, or you like manga, you like the comic books, whatever. But so if you're sort of keeping track of what you feed your brain, you will essentially formulate like the building blocks to what your style might eventually emerge into. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that, continue to use anime as an example, that anime is going to be your style. However, you're feeding yourself and your brain and your creativity reservoir, what you put out onto the page, right? Well, and that's any page. That could be paper, plastic, wood, stone, or in this case, a digital screen, right? So you take your influences and you work them. You work them into the real world. You bring them into existence for yourself, right? So what do I really mean by that? Take what you see, make a choice, make a decision to try to render it. Sometimes you'll be successful, sometimes you won't. But what you are doing is feeding your brain with those influences and those inspirations, and it's inevitable your own style or your own take on things is different from the artist who generated that image originally. So therefore, your own style will emerge through the careful study and the careful drawing and sketching of what you love, right? And let's face it, don't be afraid to do more than one image. So continue with the Star Wars reference. Say you like to draw Yoda. I did a previous video. Actually, I'm not sure if it's previous. I'm not sure if I posted it yet. But I did a video of Baby Yoda from The Mandalorian. And so obviously, I've drawn Yoda a zillion times in my day job, the illustration job, specifically for Hasbro and Lucas Licensing. So I've drawn Yoda a zillion times. But this Baby Yoda is a new one. I've drawn sort of like cartoony, sort of youthful looking versions of him, but not specifically inspired by The Mandalorian on Disney+. So it's exactly what I'm referencing and what I'm referring to. I took a piece of inspiration, in this case the images from the TV show, and plugged into my computer, my brain, and then the output was it, circuitry sort of sending it through to my hand and onto the page. That's it. It's choices. It's, yes, I chose what inspiration I'm going to follow, and then I made a choice on how I was going to allow that inspiration to manifest itself, And so I did a similar thing to that, let me get into the actual piece of art that we're looking at right now. I did a similar thing to this piece of art in that I did some light sketches. You can kind of see it there. I started off with that Actually, let me start from the beginning. This is in Procreate. I'm using the Apple Pencil on the iPad Pro. I have, I think, the first generation of the iPad Pro. So I'm a little old school in that regard. I'm sure I'm going to upgrade at some point, but not quite yet. Because this one sort of is working for me and I can't seem to let go. I can't quit you, iPad. But anyways, so that's the hardware. Software is Procreate. I'm using the previous version. I'm waiting for the new. I know it's in beta right now. I think it's version 5 of Procreate. So once that one comes out, I will do a full video on how to use Procreate. I'm talking like step by step, follow along. I know there are a zillion of them out there, but I literally want to do a step by step Procreate, how to open the app, what tools and all that. Speaking of tools, clearly, you can see if you've been following along with the imagery to go along with me meandering about making choices and how to not suck at art. You can clearly see that I'm at the choice stage of applying color, but the previous stage was about sketching, very lightly, in a very light tone on that dark brown background, just kind of getting the shape of this hedgehog character. And why a hedgehog? There was a prompt done by BeeJay DeLong on his Facebook channel. I think it's one of those communities. It's a group channel. I don't recall exactly what the name of it, and I'm sorry, BeeJay, if you watch this, please forgive me. I'm horrible remembering names. But punch in BeeJay DeLong in Facebook. Look for his group. I think it's Let's Be Creative or something. Or I know his YouTube channel. I think it's Let's Draw with BeeJay Del. So if you want to look up the YouTube channel and check out his videos, which are incredible. Anyways, so the prompt on Facebook was hedgehog. He leaves it at that. He has a bunch of the people in the group submit, their version of hedgehogs. There's some really fantastic artists in that group, and he selects, several of them and does a video, sort of a video review of them. And so that was my inspiration to even want to draw a hedgehog to begin with. So again, another choice made. And so sketched it out loosely. And then I like to draw in a heavy, dense black ink line, a contour line. So if you're kind of following along, you'll notice that I that I ink this guy out on its own layer. There's the layers, and then of course I add additional layers for the color. I wanted to keep the sort of for lack of a better word, the color palette, all sort of kind of muted, because I feel like that background brown is really sort of, it's intense, it's saturated. It's a saturated brown. Hopefully it's coming through on whatever device you're watching this on. Hopefully the screen is allowing you to see the sort of intensity of this sort of like, there's a reddish brown that's in the background. I think it's really nice. So, all right, getting into a little more real time. Let me do a little more of a commentary on this thing. I'm really going back and forth with the layers, and I am sort of selecting the line art, the black line art, and I've made a choice to convert that line art to brown rather than the black. I just liked how it played the brown, keeping that sort of earthy toned deep brown as a shadow color, and then I'm starting to apply the shadow. Now I actually picked this one up from BeeJay's his YouTube channel, where you create a new layer above the color art. I use a clipping mask layer. I will get into depth, trust me, when I do that YouTube video that I'm threatening on the actual usage of Procreate 5 step by step. I will get into clipping masks and all the layering and stuff. But I create a layer above the color, the flat color, and I turn it into a clipping mask, and then I just pick black or dark gray, and I start applying shadow. And if you notice, when I first started applying shadow, it was literally black, black on top of the color. And all I do is just slide the opacity down. So I don't get too far. I just lay a couple of strokes down in black, and then I just slide the opacity down to the tone that I'm looking for, and then I just start rendering all the shadow. And then shadow, when you apply it to something simple like this sort of cell style animation that I'm doing, is it's pretty simple when you consider a light source. In this one, probably the light source is the probably upper left side of the piece. That's why everything that's away from it should have some shadow. And further down the path of this particular piece, I'm going to get into the highlighting, and obviously the highlighting would be right up against where the perceived light source is. So anyway, I just apply that black and then convert it to a lighter tone simply by sliding the opacity down, and that creates the shadow. And if you also notice, the shadow color's got a little bit of sort of a purple-ish tone to it. And the reason it does is I thought it would be nice, maybe I'm wrong, made a choice, to have a shadow color that is not warm like the rest of the colors in this piece, with the exception of that little that little wisp of cloud that's kind of trailing behind him as he's scampering. This hedgehog is scampering. Everything else, if you notice, is pretty warm in tone, with the exception of that little cloud of dust in his teeth. So I thought, opposing it with a sort of a bluish tone, color theory, I guess. And I thought it would be kind of nice, and I sort of like it. I don't know if it's 100% successful. I think there's a point later on in this video I'll show you. I think I kind of I go in and manipulate the color tones. I make them a little more intense, a little more saturated. But for now, I chose to do this sort of bluish tone, and I also reflected that sort of bluish purple in his nose, his little hedgehoggy nose. I thought it would be kind of cool. So this is me here again. It's in Procreate, so everything is layered. Everything I have the ability to edit and manipulate it, essentially at will. And for setup purposes, if you're wondering, everyone always asks about the brush, and I'll get into that, what brush I use. But another important factor is, what canvas do I use? And this is from my buddy Elvin. Elvin asked me a specific question about canvas size. So whenever I open up a new document in Procreate, obviously you can select a preset canvas, or you can make your own and then save it, and you'll have your own sort of canvas template to work with. In this particular one, I'm on an 11 by 17 canvas, 11 by 17 in landscape mode. So I call it tabloid wide, I think is what I labeled it. So 11 inches by 17 inches, and it's 300 DPI, 300 dots per inch. So I figure that way, if I wanted to bring it into Photoshop later, I could, and I'd have enough pixels to work with if I really wanted to hammer in some Photoshop effects and be ultra dynamic with this. But I'll be honest with you, since I started using Procreate, Photoshop has become a bit more of a sort of a, it's the closer. If it was a baseball game, it's the ninth inning closer. I can do a lot of the rendering that I need to do right here in Procreate. And the fact that in the previous version that they included the ability to include a type, to manipulate that type, that's really sort of pulled some of the market share, at least in my workflow, away from Photoshop and into Procreate. So it's really made it convenient for me. And if you're wondering, again, about brushes, I use, for the ink line, I used a technical pen brush. It's in the ink set, in the brushes. And I just manipulated it. I didn't buy a brush. You can. There's a lot of great brush sets out there that people have took the liberty to manipulate to make them work perfectly for them and hopefully for you. And maybe someday I'll create a brush set of my own and title it and sell that to the world. But for now, I just use the technical pen. And I just kind of played around with the sliders and the different settings. And that's what's allowed me to do that. And if you're wondering what I'm using to render on for the shading and the coloring and the highlights, that is merely the Studio Pen, I believe is what it's called. and I juiced it up. I really I put it to its maximum settings, maximum sizes, and so that way it allows me to kind of fill in shapes, but also have that sort of tapered brush stroke feel to it. You know, by tapered I mean it comes down to a point. Whenever I apply the brush, it starts with a point and ends with a point, so it really feels like a natural brush. I mentioned the natural brush because I didn't grow up doing digital art. I literally was brush and pen and crow quill pens and markers and pencil and paper, like essentially my entire drawing career up until a few years ago, where I really just threw caution to the wind and just started becoming essentially a digital artist. And essentially I watched my productivity like shoot through the roof. So it worked for me. And it works for a lot of people, and it works for people who start digitally, I guess. I can't even be, one of those artists that say, oh, you can only render on paper and all that. I agree, it helped for me and zillions of other artists. But if you are going to be a digital artist, you darn sure have to make the choice to spend the time and to learn it and to master it and practice with it. So I'm putting the chapter on this through a little kind of cloudy background, through a little motion blur on it. And that's the Hedgehog, based on the prompt by BeeJay. Hopefully you guys get a kick out of it. Please do leave comments. Please do subscribe. More importantly, if you haven't already, please subscribe. It helps. All right? So, sketchy go ichie. Live your moment. Happy sketching, y'all. Peace.